Hello, everybody. My name is Andy Smith. I'm the lead content writer here at Kontakt.io. Very excited for another awesome webinar. And as people are coming in, why don't I'm just going to make mention of a couple other upcoming webinars here. We have on February 6th, a webinar on maximizing your hospital's supply chain. Most of these will be healthcare focused in February. We have one on nursing workforce job satisfaction and the role of staff safety with regards to technology. On the 27th, we're going to have a fireside chat between the Chief Revenue Officer here at Kontakt.io and HCA representatives. On March 5th, we have a Chief Nursing Officer on preventing workplace violence, which is increasingly critical issue these days. But today we are talking about workspace, specifically measuring the many benefits of an optimized workplace. And with us today is the Director of Smart Buildings here at Kontakt.io, Adrian Wygant. Adrian, thank you for joining us. Let's look at the schedule, or excuse me, the agenda for a moment. Perfect. So first, we'll hear about the benefits, and then I think perhaps most importantly, how to quantify these benefits, particularly with respect to ROI in regards to new initiatives. And then the soft benefits, which I'm very interested as to hear from you about that as well, Adrian. Thank you again for joining us, and please take it away.
Okay, so as you've heard, my name is Adrian Wygant, and I'm going to be speaking to these different topics today. If you do have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat, and I'll try and get to them once we're done going through the basic agenda that Andy just presented. I'm going to start off with the benefits themselves, just kind of walk you through each individual benefit that we can kind of come up with. And then in the next part, we're going to be talking about the actual quantification of those. So there are a lot of different benefits to an optimized workplace. The most obvious, the one that has a very clear return on investment, is the cost savings that you get by reducing underutilized space. The benefits of that are obviously reduced real estate costs, so lower lease costs, reduced facility costs, that is utilities, cleaning, everything along those lines. And you have reduced fit out costs, which is the equipment that you need. So that would be the computers, the furniture, the chairs, and so on. So all of those are huge potential savings if you get rid of underutilized space. Then we have the increased productivity you get by having an optimized workplace. There's a lot that goes into that, but effectively you're looking at less wasted time. That can be time that you would spend looking for the correct space type, or trying to find the location you're going to, finding a colleague, finding a specific conference room, finding a concentration space. Then you also have increased productivity by making sure that you have the correct stacking mix. So stacking mix is a technical term for the correct ratio of workspace types. So do you have enough desks versus conference rooms versus phone booths to make sure that people can work the way they want to and work efficiently? And then obviously that leads to a more productive environment, because if you have people who are trying to concentrate and all you have is an open space where everyone is speaking very loudly on the phone, then you're not anywhere near as productive as if you have the correct workspace types that you can go to get your work done in an efficient manner. And then the last one with the cute little smiley icon is about the improved workplace experience. This is probably more part of the soft benefits, but by having a well-tuned, optimized workplace, you can reduce employee churn, because if you have a very positive and effective workplace, people tend to be happy at work, and it leads to less burnout. So that way you have less employees just getting burnt out, leaving, or looking for different opportunities. It's also very good for talent acquisition, because having a very nice office, an optimized office, tends to be a status symbol, and status is one of the primary motivating factors for employees. and so it can help with talent acquisition. I remember when Google first, created their Google offices, everybody was intrigued by all the different amenities and how cool it looked and how hip it was. And that was a way for them to acquire the top talent just by virtue of having a great location that everyone wanted to work at from like a status perspective. And then lastly, we also have improved collaboration. So if the workplace is optimized, if it's set up correctly so that you have a lot of serendipitous collisions, meaning people kind of bouncing into each other and chatting about their day, you can improve collaboration, you can improve creativity. So there's a lot of benefits that you get out of having an optimized workplace. And an optimized workplace doesn't necessarily just mean knowing how many people are using what space and what space is ideal, but also having the technology to make it a functioning workplace. So with more and more people working remotely or hybrid, you have a lot of employees that come into the office that aren't very familiar with the location. And so they can spend a lot of time trying to find colleagues, the correct workplace type, the correct meeting rooms because they're not familiar with the location. And so there's technology that helps offset that problem. For example, indoor navigation, where you're going to an office that you're not very familiar with. You know that you have a meeting in conference room 32, and you can just punch that into your app, and it'll show you it's on the third floor, and it'll navigate you to get there. So that makes the experience a lot more pleasant. It makes your time in the office more productive because you're not wasting time wandering around. There's a lot of benefits to an optimized workplace. So that's just the basics. And obviously, one of the big questions is how can we quantify the benefits that you get out of that? Because just knowing that it makes things better is not enough to really justify investing in the technology required to optimize the workplace. And so the biggest return generator is the cost savings by reducing underutilized space. This is a very big topic because pre-COVID, the numbers were very clear and I could have just sat down here and just spit out a bunch of numbers. Now, once COVID hit, everything got turned upside down. Most of the reports and kind of calculators that existed around this just got taken offline and disappeared because the numbers were just not very accurate anymore. And now post-COVID, everything is in flux. So we know that A-rated office space has gotten more expensive, and anything below that has gotten significantly cheaper. So obviously that messes with the numbers very significantly. Pre-COVID, the rule of thumb was you can save 30% of your office space because it is underutilized. That was just a very clear rule of thumb. You could pretty much guarantee that that was always the case. Post-COVID, those numbers have increased even more because of hybrid work and remote work. But it's a safe bet to say, roughly 30 to 40% is usually what you can save. Now, what that means is you have reduced real estate costs, so you're reducing your lease costs, the reduced facility costs mentioned before, so that's cleaning and maintenance, and the fit out costs, and that is furniture, IT overhead, and so on. Pre-COVID, the numbers that we used to use were anywhere from $18,000 to $22,000 per desk per year. So if you do the math on that, just how many people you have on an average office floor, if you're cutting, let's say conservatively, just 20% of that space, and you look at how many desks that is, the savings are absolutely massive, and the program pays for itself pretty much upon lease renewal. So the second you optimize your workplace, you've saved a multitude of what you've actually invested in the technology. So this is generally the driving argument if you're going to pitch a workplace optimization, because you can very clearly say it's going to cost us X, and when the lease renewal comes up, we're going to be saving 3 or 4 or 5 times that. When it comes to productivity, the numbers are also very convincing, but it takes a little bit of conversion to get from a human being to a monetary value. Easy ones to go with are less time spent looking for the correct space type. So in my personal experience, we've done studies just following employees around with a clipboard, determining how much time they spend looking for the correct workspace type. One of those cases was a tech company where employees were complaining about not finding phone booths or concentration spaces where they could work quietly and undisturbed. And we found out over a week of just following employees around and measuring that they spent an average of 15 minutes per day searching for concentration spaces. And just by putting sensors into those locations and then showing on a floor plan in real time which ones are vacant and which ones aren't, we could reduce that time to 5 minutes per day per employee. And so if you aggregate those 10 minutes saved per day per employee, you're effectively getting an additional week's worth of work out of each employee just by putting that technology in there. So there's a very easy calculation then, how much is a week's worth of work per employee worth? And then you have the return on putting that technology into those rooms to optimize that. So that would be one way of quantifying the increased productivity that you have by optimizing your workplace. The correct stacking mix, you would use the same methodology. It's effectively when employees come in and they sit down at a desk. During the course of a day, you will head out to phone booths for private calls. You'll be going to meeting rooms. And so making sure that you have the correct amount of each type is very important, because if somebody wants to take a call and they're in a loud environment, the first thing they're going to look for is a phone booth. If that's not available, they're going to try and find a meeting room that they can occupy. And if that's not available, the number one location that employees go to is to a coffee shop outside of the building. And obviously, you don't want to have your employees talking about sensitive stuff outside in the coffee shop. So there's a lot of kind of soft benefits by having the correct stacking mix. But what you really, really want in an optimized environment is to make sure that your employees are not wasting time looking for the correct type of workspace, and that they have it available at all. So that's a very important aspect. And there's also multiple ways of looking at this, because from an employee perspective, if I am looking for a space, let's say a meeting room, I don't care how many people are in there. I just want to know whether it's vacant or not. So it's a binary decision from an employee perspective. If the meeting room is empty, I can go in there, close the door, and I can work. From an employer perspective, having one person in an 8-person conference room is not ideal, because you're wasting a huge amount of space. So the employer is looking at a separate metric. They're looking at how often is the space used, but also how many people are in there and is it being used correctly. So to do that, you would put a sensor in the room to determine how many people are in there. And if you find out that on average, the 8-person conference room has 1 or 2 people in it, the solution to that is you subdivide the room and turn it into 2 conference rooms of 4 people. And so with minor investment, you're doubling the amount of meeting room space you have. So there's a lot of kind of corrections that you can make using technology to make sure that you have the correct stacking mix, and the return on that is increased productivity by people spending less time searching and having the correct workspace type. The last point that I have on the slide is more productive environment. So that is just making sure that you have the correct space types arranged in the right way so that people can actually work productively. There's no point in having meeting rooms surrounded by a bunch of collaborative spaces where people are very loud and shouting around, because you won't have a productive and quiet meeting. So making sure that you have the spaces spaced out across the floor correctly means that people can work much more efficiently. So the third point that we have is the improved workplace experience. And so this one gets a little bit into the kind of hard to quantify side of things, because it's very dependent on your employees. So reduced churn is obviously, if you have the numbers pre and post optimized workplace, it's very easy to see the difference, because if you've done it correctly, you're going to have a lot less churn. And if you then look at the amount of money that you invest into each and every employee in terms of training, onboarding, ramp up, it's very easy to make a case. But this is something that you can really only do post fact, and not use it as an argument in favor of workplace transformations. It's hard to quantify, because it depends on your industry, the type of employees you have, their work ethics, and so on. But post fact, it's very easy to quantify, and the returns are generally very high, because the cost of employees in terms of onboarding, training, ramp up are very, very high. So every time you lose an employee, it's very expensive for a company. Talent acquisition, This one is very important in a tight labor market because obviously you want to have the strongest employees in your team. And so making sure that you have an attractive and optimized workplace is a good way of setting a great foundation for the first interview when you're bringing employees in. Improved collaboration. This is a big one where we've seen that having employees work remotely has had a very negative impact on collaboration because you have to plan all your conferences, you have to try and find availability, whereas in an office itself, you can have a lot of ad hoc meetings. You can walk around the workplace, find your colleagues. If they're free, you can have a chat with them. So having an optimized workplace, you tend to try and structure the flows in a way that people walk by each other frequently during the course of the day. So that leads to a lot of serendipitous collisions where people are actually talking together. It fosters team interactions. It's very good for corporate culture. And it makes the office a desired destination. It's a place where you go to meet your colleagues and to collaborate. So these are some of the benefits and how you can quantify most of them, but not all of them. And then the soft benefits, this is something of a separate topic because many of the benefits are very hard to quantify when it comes to workplace experience because there's a very subjective metrics around that. One of the big things that companies are looking for right now in this age of hybrid work is how to make the office an anchor point that brings employees back into the office. If you can make your office a real kind of central attractive point that draws employees in, there's a number of benefits. I've listed just a few here, but reduced liability risk, increased oversight, better knowledge transfer are some of the very obvious ones. If you have employees in the office, it's a lot safer environment from a liability perspective because you know what your employees are doing. They're in a controlled environment. They're connected to a controlled network. Whereas if you have everyone working remotely, the risks are much, much higher. Increased oversight. This is kind of a mixed blessing, but you know what your employees are doing. They tend to be more productive, at least while under supervision. And better knowledge transfer is a topic that has been bothering companies for ever since COVID hit. When you have people working remotely, it's very hard for new employees to get onboarded because they can't shadow people around. So having a workplace that is attractive enough and optimized enough to draw people in is a good way to make sure that you have a functioning knowledge transfer. And again, that can lead to quantifiable benefits because the ramp up time of employees is much lower and their productivity is much higher. So this is just a short overview of things to look at and how we quantify the benefits of having an optimized workplace. I believe we still have roughly 10 minutes, so I'll open it up to questions now. Andy, is there anything that you saw in the chat notes?
Yes. Thank you, Adrian. Couple of questions. One, how um how does how does this work with regards to employee privacy? If you're monitoring your employees in terms of what rooms they use or how often they're there, and trying to optimize based on what your employees are doing or using, like how do you reconcile that with privacy issues?
Well, that's a good question. I think 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said there is no way to reconcile it because the technology used for space measurement, occupancy measurement was very invasive because it was tracking people more so than space. You do have a number of technologies out there that use optical cameras. So employees tend to be rather put off by that, knowing that there's cameras that are kind of watching them all the time to determine how space is being used. But newer technology uses thermal cameras. So you have anonymous heat signatures that are being used to determine which spaces are being used. So effectively what you're doing is you're tracking the space and not the people. So you can see the number of heat signatures or effectively the number of people that are using a space and when the space is being used, but you don't know who it is because it's anonymous. There's no camera feed, no video feed, no pictures involved. So to that end, when you're optimizing a workplace, what you're effectively doing is monitoring occupancy. You're seeing, how often is a space being used, in what frequency at what specific times, and that we can do anonymously nowadays. So there is no intrusiveness in regards to the question you asked.
Okay, yeah, that's great. The heat signatures is great. Um, I have another question. Do you this one here is from Joshua Woods. Do you recommend specific amenities as like an incentive to get employees to come back to the office?
Uh, well, so there's two different ways of looking at it. There are certain amenities that make specific workspaces more attractive. And that varies very much by the type of employee that you have. So what we do when we're looking at space optimization is we add specific tags to each individual location. So you can tag a desk as saying it has dual monitors, it's height adjustable, it has natural vegetation and light. And so you can see which specific types of workspaces are preferred by employees, and you can have more of those in the hopes of making it more attractive. But if you're trying to bring employees back into the office in general, so we're not talking like optimization of the workplace itself, then there's a few different barriers that you need to overcome. So you need to determine why is it that employees don't want to come into the office. It could be, childcare issues, that they have children at home that they have to take care of. So how would you offset that? If you have childcare facilities near or in your office building, that is absolutely wonderful for those specific people because it gives them the absolute perfect incentive to come into the office. If it is the commute that is keeping people away, because it means that they're losing an hour or two a day just coming into the office, it's a lot more difficult. Companies have tried offering free food on specific days. And what we've seen is that people come in for lunchtime for the meals and then they disappear again. So that hasn't really been all too effective. I've seen companies throw in kind of free dry cleaning, but then people show up only for those specific events. I don't think there is really an ideal solution yet for overcoming the opportunity cost of the commute. That has only ever been done through mandates, and that has negative impacts on your employees. What has been working very well is having satellite offices that offset the commute. So it only takes you 10, 15 minutes to get to the office instead of actually commuting to downtown and losing an hour or two of your day. But I'm afraid I don't have an ideal solution for that. The second I do find it, I'm sure I'll be able to tell everyone, but I can also make a lot of money with that solution. So.
Yeah, I bet, Adrian. Thank you. I mean, one more question, if we can, and this is sort of related. I mean, certainly during the pandemic, everybody who could work from home was working from home. Now, anecdotally, it feels like we're moving more towards a hybrid work environment. Um, where do you think we're headed? Do you anticipate a return to pre-pandemic, like everyone in the office full time? Do you think that's that's there's potential for that?
Uh, if there is potential for that, if there is a very strong economic downturn and the power goes back to the employers, which I think nobody is hoping for. But if the job market becomes challenging and the employers can just say, you show up in the office or you don't have a job, if the job market is such that that forces you back into the office, I can imagine us going back to that at least for a certain period of time. That being said, I think people have gotten used to the newer way of working, be it remote or hybrid. A lot of people have moved out into more remote areas because they've gotten used to working remotely. Those people would not want to move again just to have to go back into the office. So I think, especially given how technology is evolving, we really are looking at a world in which the 5 days a week in the office is not going to be the norm anymore. I'm seeing a lot more of it in Europe where they just accepted that Mondays and Fridays are not office days anymore, and that they look at it as having 3 days in the office, and those are the ones that you analyze when it comes to optimizing your workplace. Uh, Again, technology plays a huge part in this, thanks to Zoom, Teams, WebEx, and so on. We can have remote meetings and we can collaborate. And I think, the younger generations who have had more exposure to this, they will be able to do this a lot more efficiently than we are right now. And I also can kind of imagine a world in which you have kind of a two-tiered system in the office where new employees who just joined the company or younger employees have to spend more time in the office. And once you become, let's say, like a veteran, where the company knows that you're reliable, that you work efficiently, you already know who to talk to, the corporate culture, that then it becomes a privilege that you can work remotely more of the time or all the time, and then you only come in to train new employees. So there's a lot of different options. I don't really know exactly what we're going to settle on. I think it's all still very much in flux. I know that most company CEOs are trying to bring their employees back just from a productivity perspective and a knowledge transfer perspective. But that has kind of negative undertones because a productive employee is always productive, whether he's at home or in the office. And if he's not as productive at home as he is in the office, he'll come into the office. So this drive to bring people back into the office kind of assumes that you're doing that to make sure that the less productive people in your office actually do more. And do you really want to be forming a corporate culture around that? So I think the next 2 or 3 years are going to be very telling in that respect. But I think it's all still really much open as to what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, and in some ways only time will tell, right? We have just a couple minutes left. I have one more question that's come in here, Adrian, um, on the topic of the 4-day work week. I know that some friends of mine work for the company Kickstarter, and they have a 4-day work week, meaning that they don't work on Fridays. Have you seen other organizations who shut down on Fridays or a specific day of the week? I mean, are you seeing other companies offer 4-day work weeks?
I've seen a lot of companies toy around with it. I mean, what I'm seeing more is that you have select days where people just don't have to go to the office. The 4-day work week, I think, is much more viable in Europe than it is here in the States, where we have kind of a more active week in general. I'm sure nobody would really oppose a 4-day work week, but from a productivity standpoint, I think it's limited to specific types of companies, because pretty much every company really most companies need to be available around the clock and not have specific days where they're closed. The other thing is, from a city planning perspective, if you have days that are just completely closed, so like let's assume that you don't work Fridays, so you have a 3-day weekend. That doesn't offset the problems of the commute and everybody going into work the same way it would be if you had kind of rotating days off. So if I spread my employees, if all of them are only working 4 days a week, but I spread them over the entire week, then you have less people commuting in concentrated masses. So it's better for city planning purposes and making commutes more bearable. And I've seen a lot of companies try and kind of spread out when employees come into the office. But what we're seeing is effectively Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are the busy days, and Monday and Friday people just show up late or leave early or don't come in at all. So I think there's going to be a lot of kind of back and forth on that, and we'll see what it ultimately results in.
Excellent. All great food for thought, Adrian. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for joining us. We are at time now. Thank you for submitting questions. We have a number of upcoming webinars, as I mentioned at the top of the call. You can check them out on our website, Kontakt.io. Adrian's email is here on the screen if you have any additional follow-up questions or suggestions. We're always open to feedback. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And my thanks again to you, Adrian. Everyone enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.